What would you say if one of your friends said to you, why are you a Christian? Most people haven't really thought about the answer to that question. And my experience has been the best thing we can do is tell our story.
Yeah.
When you do, it does unlock something and enters into a conversation about faith. And we don't have to have the answers to everything, but we should all be able to be prepared to give an answer if someone asks us to give a reason for the hope that we have.
Welcome everybody, this is Simon Gilbert with Inspired, and for those of you that are new to us, Inspired is just all about telling great stories of triumphant hope through difficult times, overcoming challenges, whatever people are going through. We want to be real, want to be authentic, and I love it how I'm blessed to have mates from all sorts of different spheres of jobs and experiences that get to stir us where we are at. So this week, I'm really thrilled to have with me Phil Knox. Hi, Phil.
Hi, Simon. So great to be with you.
Yeah, brilliant, mate. I've been looking forward to this. So Phil is the head of mission to young adults of the Evangelical Alliance. So we had your boss, Gav, several months back. And Phil's got a shared passion with Gav and his own sort of passion for this generation, for the local church. He loves learning. He's got a degree in law and also in mission evangelism. You're married to Danny. You've got two sons, Caleb and Joss. Yeah. And, we've bumped in, crossed paths at various conferences and overlapped in preaching stuff. But I'll be honest, Phil, I don't really have a clue about your backstory. So go on, let's go right back and tell us about how you came to faith and your context.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, brilliant. I was born in 1983, so you can age me there. And I was born in Sheffield. Two amazing Christian parents my real backstory is fascinating. Actually, my grandfather became a Christian during the war on the Isle of Islay off the west coast of Scotland, which is known for its whiskey. And the army chaplain led him to the Lord and basically said, if there is enough evidence for being if you in court for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict? And he was really convicted by those words, and those words have kind of resonate for our family. He became a Christian there, went back from the war and led his whole family to faith. And as a result of that, my uncle's an evangelist. My dad led many people to the Lord, and so I grew up in an amazing Christian family. I recognised the moment I became a Christian was I was about 6 years old. I was even more excitable then than I am now. I was at a Christian festival and someone just basically told me the good news of Jesus and that I could be friends with God. I could be forgiven for the things I'd done wrong. I already needed forgiving. I knew that at 6. But I could always go to heaven when I died. And I thought this was the best news ever. Recognised making a decision then in a marquee in Peterborough, and then I think throughout my teenage years, you obviously have the opportunity to kind of turn away from that or make your faith your own. And I really recognised a number of different moments as a teenager choosing to say, no, this is for me. But the rubber really hit the road for me, Simon, when I was 21 years old. I was at university. I was studying law. The plan was to kind of earn loads of money and be a successful lawyer. And a phone call one Saturday. I'm having lunch with my mum, get a phone call from a family friend who says some words I'll never forget. She said, "Phil, I'm really sorry, but this morning your dad has died." And these words just completely ripped my world apart. Dad was my hero, just amazing Christian guy. And it just was like, we had recognised that was another real decision moment. Felt like in some ways saying, God, stuff you for letting this happen, or at the same time saying, God, we really need you right now as a family. I've been a Christian for over 30 years. The closest I've ever known God is in those first kind of few weeks after Dad died. Then what happened was one of the amazing things that I found about knowing Jesus is he gives you a real meaning and purpose. Yeah. And I think that's a real narrative for our generation at the moment. It's kind of a meaningless and purposeless generation. Yeah. And so I found that in just telling other people about Jesus. I've always wanted to share my faith. I'm sure, as we'll come on to later. But for me, I found that working for Youth for Christ. I did 13 years as an evangelist for Youth for Christ and saw thousands and thousands of young people become Christians. Got married in 2008 to Danny, and we have moved then into Birmingham, live in Birmingham, part of the local church there, done youth ministry for a while. But again, the next significant moment in my story has been, in the last few years, I've been diagnosed with the same heart condition that killed my dad at 48.
Wow.
And there have been genuine moments where in the middle of the night, you kind of wake up and you think, am I going to die? You're not thinking straight, your heart's beating. And I can't tell you what a difference it makes knowing that God is with me in those moments, but also the assurance that I don't know what my future holds, but I know who holds my future. And so that's been another really significant part of my story. And then in 2018, God really awakened in me a heart for the whole church, not just young people. And I kind of had to admit to myself and everybody else that I was an evangelist doing youth ministry, not a youth worker doing evangelism. And so joined at that stage the Evangelical Alliance, whose mission is to make Jesus known across the whole of the UK. And so I've spent the last few years equipping and inspiring the church around evangelism, and especially around kind of young adults. So yeah, bit of my story.
Fantastic. All right, so we've nailed it in the from sort of high up looking down. Let's now dig into it after that good synopsis. So I love, you told me that your dad was a senior partner of a law firm, but he actually chose to live on an estate. So you grew up on a council estate. What was that like?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, do you know what? At the time, just didn't know any different, to be honest, Simon, for me personally. And I think as you grow older, you realise, your dad could probably buy any house in Birmingham, and yet was choosing to live where we live. And where we live's amazing, actually, but not statistically, he's in the top 2% of deprivation in the country. And we saw at one point the guy who lived across the road was shot in a drugs battle, and so it's not an ordinary place to live. But I think I tell you, the thing that really had a profound impact on us kids was seeing the difference Jesus made in our lives, thinking, why on earth would our parents choose to live here? Kind of without it being real. And so I think for us, that was a real moment of realizing, actually, this faith is not to be messed around with. And, it's not just a kind of lifestyle addition, but actually, has gone to the real root. And our mum and dad really feel called here, have given their lives to serve this estate. And we just, so to some extent, it was normal. But as you get older, you realise how extraordinary it was. And really interestingly as well, that kind of DNA of wanting to serve the last, the least, and the lost in our society has kind of transferred to kind of us kids. We still live as part of that community. My sister lives in an urban priority area in Edinburgh, and so it had a profound impact really on all of us.
And can you think of sort of vignette events that were sort of God breaking in those times?
We were part of the church at an amazing season where which had a book written about it called Angels on the Walls. And what happened was in that season there was a gang called the Quinton Mob that used to meet outside our church. And when the vicar moved in the 80s, a guy called Wallace Brown, he moved into this estate, and this gang just terrorized the whole community. They would deal drugs and have sex openly on the lawn of the church, and he moved in and basically, I think, kind of gave God an ultimatum: if this isn't sorted out, I'll go and find a nice suburb to minister in. But what was amazing was we really engaged in a lot of spiritual warfare as a church, and people in the church then began to see some quite scary angels. Some described them as kind of wearing samurai armor. Wow. And miraculously, this gang that had existed for decades just disbanded within a few weeks of really engaging, prophetically and powerfully in spiritual warfare. And what was funny was the local police put it down to them opening a police station 2 miles away, because it was just such an extraordinary mystery. And we're yet to meet a reformed gang member, but we think if we did, they would tell the story of seeing angels, basically scaring them off. And so that was a real moment again for us. And since then, the church has really thrived. We're now, for a council estate church, absolutely thriving, seeing people come to faith. And for the past kind of 30 years, it's, God has done wonderful things in us and through us, really.
Superb. So you went off for a few years to study Lord, I mean, was that intending? You said jokingly intending to make loads of money, or was it? Did you have that sort of social justice element that you wanted to come back and benefit the community? Or what?
No, it's kind of what us Knoxes do. We're all lawyers and evangelists, really. So I think, if I think of all the, I think of most of my family and the generations above me, my uncle, my grandfather, my dad, all passionate about wanting to tell about Jesus, but also served in the legal field. So I kind of stumbled into it. Really, I wasn't particularly good at futuring about what I was going to be doing, and God then had other plans in terms of calling me to ministry. So I'm not convinced that I've been a very good lawyer, to be honest. I think a bit too much energy, I think, probably, but yeah, we'll see.
And I'm sure it provides a sort of rigor to your thinking in terms of you develop and
storytelling.
Yeah. Well, should we talk about that now? Story Bearer and your book there, how to share your faith with your friends. I know that's your passion. Yeah. You're very honest in it. You share failures as well as successes.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
And I think that's really important. I think just on that failure note before we come on to the book, that we need to make sure that when we talk about evangelism, we don't just tell the stories of people coming to faith, because evangelism's for everybody. We all get a part to play, and the challenge is that so often it doesn't go well. You and I both have stories where it's just been a disaster, and the problem is that some people think, some people build that they hear someone like you or me speak at their church, and they go, I'll give it a go, and they invite 2 neighbours to Alpha. And neither neighbour comes, and they think, well, that's obviously not for me then, because because my experience is not the same as the person on the stage. And so I think so as you say, the book is about stories of failure as well as success, but they're told deliberately because I really believe we all get a part to play, and I don't want to disqualify anyone from that. So the book hilariously came out the worst possible week in history, I think, to launch a book, which was the week 2 years ago when the bookshops closed. And so we planned these 2 massive launch events, hundreds of people coming, and just had to cancel everything because lockdown struck. And what was even funnier was I was going around Asda with a trolley full of prosecco, ready for the launch event. At the time I got the phone call to tell me that the first event was cancelled, and so it was at the time when everybody else was panic buying toilet roll, and I looked like this crap. I looked like I was preparing for the apocalypse with a bunch of fizzy wine, which was great. But the book is about how to share your faith with your friends. Really simply, I felt I've in 20 years of training people in evangelism and trying to inspire and equip the church, I've really felt there was a kind of poverty of resources to kind of say, how do you relationally, organically engage your friends? How can you share your story in a way that makes sense to your friends? But how can we understand that the way most people come to faith in the UK in the 21st century is not through evangelists like you and me, sadly, or at least we're not the primary people that people credit. People mostly credit a friend, a family member, a colleague, or a neighbour. And I think we could all be more effective in sharing our story. As I've kind of heard stories of people talking about the book, as I've continued to train people in sharing their faith. When you say, what would you say if one of your friends said to you, why are you a Christian? Most people haven't really thought about the answer to that question. Yeah. And my experience over years of sharing my faith with my friends has been the best thing we can do is tell our story. Yeah. And also I've asked countless people over the years, can I tell you my story? A little bit like the one we shared at the beginning of this interview. And no one's ever said no, because everyone's terribly British and polite. But when you do, it does unlock something and enters into a conversation about faith. And we don't have to have the answers for everything, but we should all be able to be prepared to give an answer if someone asks us to give a reason for the hope that we have. And so that's what the book's about. It encourages us to pray for a few friends to come to faith. It encourages us to be great friends. It encourages us to know our story, know the gospel. But also at the end, I'm also absolutely convinced that most people I meet, if someone said to them, I want to become a Christian, what do I do? They're not necessarily equipped to be able to take people on that journey. And we don't teach it. We teach it in hardly any of our theological colleges, I've discovered as well. Yeah. And we just take it as a given. And so that moment of being able to lead someone to make the most important decision of their life, the book covers that as well.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We had Jay John on a few weeks ago as one of England's premier evangelists. And he did some research. He asked 1,000 churches who had done any training on sharing faith and evangelism training. And 0.3%, so 30 churches out of 1,000 had done it, which is really, really poor and concerning. In terms of sharing fails, I during lockdown, this might encourage people. We got 85 streets, 85 houses on our street, and I invited them all on an alpha, and I logged in as already, and nobody came. I was absolutely gutted. And then I think, in terms of not being ready to give an account of yourself and why you believe. I remember at university having prayed, daily for my flatmates, intentionally living with them, and then we're having a dinner party one night at one of the guys' house with his parents, and they all gathered around, and they said, "All right, Simon, so what is it you really believe?" And I just went, it was the moment I've been waiting for, and it came out so rubbish. I was absolutely gutted. So we do need to be equipped. We do need to be ready. I don't know if you've come across the Jesus at the door stuff.
Have you? Through you, Simon. It's your enthusiasm that's introduced it to me.
I mean, I had the chance to lead someone to the Lord this week using it, and I absolutely love it as one tool among many. But I think it's the most effective tool I've found in the Western world. So another plug for Jesus at the door, guys, if you want to check that out.
Come
on. Anyway, back to you. So you've written the book and you shared some of the stories, but I mean, I love those stories. They're so inspiring. So you, as a practitioner, in terms of seeing friends and neighbours come to faith, go on, give us some stories.
Yeah, cool. So I said I became a Christian at 6 years old. I think there's something that God births in us in our very early days of being a Christian, and for me, that was always, I just wanted to see people experience what I had experienced and know Jesus for themselves. And so I remember at school as a kind of 8-year-old, I got every single lad in my class to come to Voice Brigade to basically hear about Jesus, apart from one who was called. I don't remember the names of all the lads who came, but I do remember this one who didn't come, called Richard Clarkson, and I remember him when he left the school. I remember crying, weeping on my parents' bed, going, "I think I've missed my opportunity for him to know Jesus." And just there's something I think God birthed in us there. So I mean, I guess my most, I mean, if I'm really honest, the most exciting person I've led to Jesus is my best friend. And I think just because I see him, in fact, I'm seeing him in a few hours, and I see daily the impact Jesus makes in his life. And he's called Adam. He grew up in a completely non-Christian family. His dad was in and out of prison. They really hated Christians. And it was really fun that I would get. I somehow it wasn't quite the wrong crowd, but it was a different crowd. So I remember being kind of in the houses of like drug dealers growing up with Adam, and he'd go, "Oh, this is my mate Phil. He's a Christian, but he's all right." As if I kind of, as if I had a kind of disease. He's a Christian, but he's all right. He's not contagious. Well, I was contagious, obviously, but in the end, with Adam, his family believed that kind of Jesus was like an astronaut from outer space with advanced knowledge, and that's why churches have spires, because they're shaped like rockets trying to get back up to God, and that kind of, really wacky stuff, really critical, dismissive, and aggressive towards Christians. And so met him at 13, we just hit it off immediately, became great friends, and for 8 years basically I prayed for him and invited him to stuff. He never came. We ran youth alphas and stuff in our Christian union, and he never came to anything. But gradually God just began to get on his case, and I think through years of conversation and me just trying to live for Jesus as a teenager, again not getting it always right and making mistakes along the way, but eventually there was a kind of key moment really where we went away to a Christian festival. He says that I tricked him into going. I'm not sure. I think I said it was a Christian festival. He says I made it out to be this really fun festival, but didn't mention the Christian bit. Right. Anyway, we get to this Christian festival, and basically God audibly speaks to him and says, "You know I'm real. You need to let me in." And then he and I had two key conversations. The first is his girlfriend had just dumped him, and he said, "I'm going to sort my life out. Phil, what do you think?" And I said, I think the only way you can sort your life out is by giving your life to Jesus and let him sort it out. And he says at that time, I'd earned the right over 8 years of friendship to be able to say that. But he says at the time, that he was a bit offended. But in the end, that was one of the key conversations. The other one was, he talked about, he was really guilty for some of the stuff he'd done as a teenager. And he just said, "Phil, are you telling me you don't feel guilty for anything you've ever done wrong?" And he certainly knew I was no angel as a teenager. And so I said no. And so that was the other key conversation. He then surrendered his life to Jesus shortly after that. and his life is completely different. He's now a leader in our community, in our church, married a beautiful Christian girl, got 3 wonderful Christian kids, and is one of the most passionate, wholehearted followers of Jesus. Another one, our neighbour whose house I'm looking at now has recently become a Christian. I invited him to Alpha. He said no initially, then the next year went back, and then he eventually comes along to Alpha, encounters Jesus, and now him and his whole family of 6 come to church every week and are completely transformed. But at the same time, I've still got a list of people who I pray for almost every day. You know, John, Amy, Paul, Anna, Dave, Matt. Every day I'm trying to say, Lord, would you break through into their lives? And I pray that by the time I go to glory, at least some of them have given their lives to Jesus.
Yeah. I'm actually really encouraged right now because first one of our neighbours since we've been in 2.5 years has come to faith. So I'm absolutely thrilled.
Great, Simon, great.
Hey folks, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. I'm loving the response we're getting from across the world. It's just wonderful to see how encouraging and inspiring it is being and hitting the spot. Listen, if you are being blessed by it, I'd love it. Basically, this happens under the auspices of our ministry, Great Lakes Outreach, which works in the poorest and the hungriest country in the world, which is Burundi. We're having an incredible impact in the toughest of circumstances. We want to carry on supporting those local folks doing a great job. So if you wanted to, greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. You could make a donation there. I'd so appreciate it. Also, it's word of mouth, isn't it? So gossip these podcasts to other people, get them to subscribe, give us a great review. Absolutely wonderful. So grateful to you. So that's greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. If you want to do a monthly, a couple of quid a month, or a one-off donation, we'd be incredibly grateful. All right, now let's get back to the podcast. You talk about your 13 years of Youth for Christ. Give us some highlights there.
Yeah, again, just I'm honest, just at the time, best job in the world. My first 3 years were spent running residential weekends away for 11 to 14-year-olds. We'd have hundreds of young people every weekend from like May to October. And I was a kind of a cross between Bear Grylls and Anton Deck, running, we'd go to activity centre, we'd put on kind of abseiling and climbing and stuff. And then in the evenings, kind of have road shows with games and then gospel presentation, and just saw thousands of young people give their lives to Jesus. And if I'm honest, that was the real highlight. And so, that was really cool. And then lots of evangelism training as well. So I'm, in this part of the world, 85% of people become Christians under the age of 23. So really believe in young people sharing their faith. And so did a load of stuff working with people like Youth Alpha and creating resources to equip and inspire young people to be able to share their faith with their friends. And the highlights come as an aging, middle-aged evangelist, when now and again, God in his generosity, you bump into someone, you go to preach at a church and someone comes up to you and says, "Do you remember me?" And I'm like, "No, I really don't. Yeah. I'm really sorry." And it's like, they say, "You wouldn't, I was 14 when I last saw you." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, that explains it, really helpful." And they then say things like, "I became a Christian at something you preached at." And it's those moments. Lovely. Really that. But Youth for Christ are an amazing movement and continue to reach young people with the gospel. And it was a real brilliant 13 years.
And then it was a sort of natural progression, I suppose, because Gav, your boss now, was also at Youth for Christ before. So is that quite a standard procedure, going Youth for Christ to Evangelical Alliance?
Yeah, maybe. But chemistry is really important as well. I think God calls us more to people than to ministries, I think. Mm-hmm. And I think my relationship with Gav has been one where my accusation to him is that he ruined my promising legal career, because actually it was I'd never met him before. It was a conversation with him at a wedding that led me to join Youth for Christ. And I think there's sometimes there's various people God puts around us who I think we're just called to minister with, and you see that throughout the Bible, don't you? Jesus, the disciples, Paul, Timothy, Silas, Barnabas, Elijah, Elisha. I think God calls us to people, and so with Gav, there's always just been this chemistry, this like-heartedness to want to see the UK reach for Jesus, and so. when Gav left, Bill Hybels talks about when some people leave your organisation, you say few. When some people leave, you're a bit gutted, but some people leave and you want to vomit everywhere. And I remember Gav sitting me down in his office and wanting to vomit everywhere when he said he was moving on. But I promised the board of Youth for Christ that I'd do at least a year, and felt profoundly called actually to help the incoming CEO, a guy called Neil O'Boyle, who's brilliant, and I served with him and did 3 years actually, really kind of in that role. But then really did feel at that time of being called to the whole church to minister with Gav at the Evangelical Alliance, and so that's been fun, and I'm really passionate about the local church and part of the leadership here in Birmingham, but also wanting to see the whole church equipped and inspired to do mission and evangelism as effectively as we can. And so that's what my role at EA has looked like.
All right, and with a particular focus on young adults, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So in 2009, the EA did a piece of research called A Missing Generation, and it was called such because it found between 1985 and 2005, we lost over half of those going to church in their 20s in the UK. So they began to become known as the missing generation. And so after a kind of few years of trying a few things, they felt it would be great to have a staff worker whose job it was to really resource the church in his area. So that was what God kind of called me to in 2018. And you know what? So my kind of mission really, I want to see the missing generation become the found generation. I dream of a church thriving amongst all generations and significant numbers in 20s and 30s coming to faith. And so, and interestingly, actually, I think God really is on the move amongst kind of millennials and Gen Z, in the sense that during the pandemic, there was some two bits of independent research were done that found that somewhere between a third and a half of all 18 to 34-year-olds had checked out online church in that first 6 months of the pandemic. That's a long way from the missing generation. And so I'm absolutely convinced that there's a real spiritual hunger amongst young adults at the moment. But as a church, we need to do our best to engage and inspire young adults themselves to share their faith with their friends.
Are you encouraged?
Yeah, I really am. I'm really encouraged by the openness of the church to want to make the kind of the relevant cultural changes. So one of the things that I've been doing as part of my role is I spend most of my Sundays preaching in a church in the morning or evening, and then hosting a conversation with the leadership around kind of how to help church engage with the culture of young adults. And so we go through a kind of series of conversations. For example, one of them is about welcome. So just how encouraging a culture of welcome. This is a generation that really wants to belong, not just kind of receive a handshake at the door. And so how do we help people? How do the church become a place where people can have meals and really feel like they find belonging at an age where loneliness for 18 to 34-year-olds has never been higher. And so we have those kind of conversations, and I'm really encouraged by the openness for the church to have those conversations, but also the willingness to change that. And I think the other thing I'm really encouraged by is the kind of the coincidence of not only the church wanting to create an environment for belonging. Every story I hear of a young adult coming to faith at the moment, A, involves a friend, but B, often involves some form of digital engagement. So just as in the first century, the Roman road was used to kind of spread the gospel around the Roman Empire, I do believe that the information superhighway, it has the absolute potential to see the gospel go viral across our world, alongside deep biblical authentic relationship. And so the stories that we're hearing, a story of a girl called Izzy who became a Christian during lockdown. She stumbled across Christian TikTok, no Christian background. What does she do? She gets compelled by these videos, reaches out to a Christian friend invites her to Alpha, buys her a Bible, gives her life to Jesus, but can't go to church for the first 3 months because they're not open. But that coincidence of digital relationship and a church and churches creating environments for belonging is, I think there's lots of room for encouragement there.
Yeah. You talked about fasting and idolatry. I love this thing that you did, fasting for support for a year because it became an idol in your life. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm sure you can tell I'm quite a passionate person, and I think the sin print of passionate people is they can get prone to become too passionate about the wrong things. And I just love sports. I've got a bit of an addictive personality, and I had this. God just profoundly spoke to me in the November of 2014. Where I was just, I was going to the loo in the middle of the night and thinking about sport. I was kind of, I was looking forward to the football match of the weekend more than I was looking forward to church. Those kind of things, and I think I've in my experience, there's nothing better than fasting for rooting out idolatry, and so I felt. I don't know if it was my idea or the Holy Spirit's idea, but we decided to give up the whole sport for a whole year. So 2015 was a barren wasteland of watching sport, thinking about sport, talking about sport, playing sport, And there was a great moment where I called up my my very loyal Sky Sports subscription and said, I'm really sorry, I'm cancelling for a year. And they said, why? Of course, they want a reason why to persuade you to, to persuade you to stay with them. And I said, well, I really feel challenged by God to that's become an idol in my life. And so that's what. And you could always feel the person on the other end flicking through their laminate sheets, looking for what to say next in response to this.
So, was it a powerful experience for you?
Yeah, I think what I'd say is I would really recommend to anyone who feels that there is an idol in their life of any kind. Actually, fasting is an amazing way of saying to God, look, you are more important than this thing, and completely letting it go. And for me, sport is now back in my life, but it now just doesn't have the same hold over me that it did in 2014.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I know you lost your dad way back when you're 21, and you lost your mum more recently. How has grief played itself out for you, and God's faithfulness in the mix?
Yes, both those things have been a real challenge. So my mum sadly was diagnosed with cancer in the summer before COVID, and then we found out just as the first lockdown happened, that the diagnosis was terminal, and so I had these really challenging few months really where the whole of the world was grieving, but every day I was going to sit at the end of my mum's drive and just watch her slowly physically deteriorate, and then she sadly died in June. And so, and the other thing about that was it was just exhausting as well. Yeah. I've never known physical exhaustion like that. I think part of the challenge was my wife and I were trying to work and homeschool at the same time, and so there was pressure on family life. But at the same time, and I'm sure those of us listening who've been through grief will understand this, that it just physically takes it out of you. And I remember the Monday after the funeral, just suddenly having energy for what felt like the first time in months, which we're so spiritually and physically linked, aren't we? But in terms of God's presence during that, I've never known God closer than in times of grief like that. I think that those verses in the Psalms that say when our hearts are broken, God is close to us, have just been absolutely true. I think the other thing that's been really key has been the role of Scripture during those times. So the night my dad died, my mum is sat in bed. She's lost her husband in 25 years. Her present is agony. Her future's uncertain. She's wondering how she's going to raise us kids. She's wondering what finances look like. And this is a woman who became a Christian as a girl, and the Bible was always so central to our lives as a family. And in fact, my dad would kind of teach me we had to learn Bible verses in the car on the way to school, and so Scripture memory was really important. And my mum, from somewhere in the midst of this agony of that day having lost her husband, remembers Psalm 68 verse 5, which says, "A father to the fatherless and defender of widows is God in his holy dwelling." And she would say that those verses saved her in that moment. And I think as I've journeyed through the highs and lows of life, that Scripture in our heart just makes a huge difference. And I think in the age of the smartphone, where you've got the Bible on tap and you can Google any phrase and it comes up with where it is, it's not quite the same as really knowing it. And so for us during the period of mum dying, the verses in Lamentations were as a whole world was lamenting, because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning, great is your faithfulness. We'd almost say that over ourselves over and over again. Written thousands of years ago by Jeremiah, who's lamenting a different situation, but yet can speak so powerfully. And so God's word was alive in us. And then I think the other thing I'd say is just the role of the church. I think we can be so often down on the church. The church is incredible. I would champion and celebrate the church to the day I die. And the church during our times of grief and pain have just been incredible. We didn't cook a meal for 2 or 3 months. Wow. Our kitchen looked like Clinton's cards. Our living room looked like a florist. We were just so blessed at a time when everybody was struggling as well. Yeah. People really, come good and just look after us. It's better, to be honest. Being an orphan at 36, wasn't a kind of pleasant experience or what I would have wished. But I'm also grateful for having 2 wonderful parents who love Jesus, and I stand on the shoulders of giants. But also a huge part of my story is that God has been faithful and with me. And I don't know so often, so often it's the classic question, isn't it? Why does suffering happen? The answer is, in so many situations, I don't know. But I do know that God is with us and is close to the brokenhearted. And that's a huge part of my story.
So your mum died in lockdown, and then throughout the COVID season, how have you found it for doing personal evangelism and your heartbeat? Were you a cage lion, or were you able to be creative?
No, I was to begin with. I was certainly a cage lion, and certainly talking about the disappointment of of the book not coming out, and in the same way I wanted it to, and I don't know about how you find this, Simon, but I really struggled talking to people online. It just wasn't the same. I got a reminder of this. One of my first Sunday preaches after lockdown was preaching in a church in Reigate, and preached the gospel, gave an opportunity for people to respond. And this guy responded and found out his story afterwards. He was a homeless guy, banned from the local homeless shelter, first week in church, surrenders his life to Jesus and has lunch with the pastor later that week. Those moments don't happen on Zoom, and so I really struggled because I think it's easy for us communicators to get our identity from being in front of people, and we miss that. So 2 things I would say just really impacted me. The first was finding new rhythms. So I found myself really discouraged and had to almost drag myself out of this. And so what I did was I found myself in the morning in bed, almost not my lowest, that, because of the Lord's great love moment, knew every morning I needed to remind myself of. But what I did was as soon as I woke up, I put some clothes on and went for a walk around my community, listened to the Bible and prayed. And that rhythm, that change of rhythm was really, really salvific in that moment. The second thing I found, and you'll appreciate this as a frustrated evangelist, I just found God really want to push me in terms of stepping out my comfort zone in terms of talking to people about Jesus on the streets, because obviously there's no gatherings to do. And so I think it was right at the beginning of lockdown. Someone had a dream. Someone I hardly know had a dream for me about speaking into people's lives. And so I just began, as I ran. I ran a lot during lockdown, partly because I was eating so much, working from home, bereavement and barbecues, and never a good combination. And so I decided I could either eat less or run more. So I ran more. And as I ran around the streets, I felt the Holy Spirit just lead me to talk to certain people, and just say really simply, I developed a line, because I think that's important, having been prepared. So I said, I'm really sorry to bother you. I'm a Christian. As I run, I pray for people. Is there anything I can pray for you today? And use that as a kind of opener for conversation. And just had these extraordinary experiences. I lost count of the people I ended up praying for. Prayed for a guy called Stevie, who was on crutches, and prayed for healing for him. It didn't work in that sense. But actually what happened was, with Stevie, I developed a relationship with him, was able to give him a Bible, was able to every time I saw him, we would have a good conversation. At one point, we stood in a bus stop for an hour or so and talked about faith. And that was the first guy I spoke to. One guy, I was running with a friend, and we saw a guy bent over double in this kind of country park near our house, and we prayed for healing for him. Again, he wasn't healed, but he was 2 miles from home was coming back from hospital and he just couldn't move. So I went to get the car, drove him home, and his house, the council had just not done any work on his house, so he had drips coming through his ceiling. His house was it was just awful. And so my best mate Adam, who of course have told his story, he and I basically bought this guy some food, and then spent a couple of Saturday mornings basically just kind of doing up this guy's house, and just had this amazing moment. And through that, with him, had conversations about faith. And he, of course, with his back, couldn't maintain his home, and so that was another thing that God did. But just loads of moments. There was a moment where in our community, 7:30 in the morning, was running, bumped into this couple called Max and Ria, and said, "Can I pray for you?" Max was already swigging a can of lager, and so they were so blown away by this. No one had ever done this for them before. They said, "Oh, can we pray for you?" I'm like, "Yeah, great." And let me tell you, what came out of their mouth was hardly the Book of Common Prayer, but it was beautiful, and there was this moment of connection, and I think what I found is, and I'm sure, and I hope people are encouraged by this, and I'm sure it's the same for you, Simon. We don't, as evangelists, we don't have an endless well of confidence, but we do. But I find the more you do things like that, the more confidence builds in you. You do have to kind of take a big gulp of confidence and say, "Lord, please be with me in this moment." I've got no idea what's to happen. But in all that time, only 2 people have ever said no to being prayed for. Yeah. And I've just, tens of people I've had encounters with where I've encouraged them and prayed with them and given them an opportunity to have a conversation around faith. And so, that was fun.
Love it. The picture that makes me feel the freest in terms of sharing faith is a picture of walking through the apple orchard of life. You shake the tree, and if it's ripe, the fruit falls, and if it's not, don't carry on yanking the branch. And it just means that, Jesus presumably was the best evangelist. He didn't see everyone come to him. Paul was probably the second best, and he got loads of rejection. So they're not rejecting us as they say no. And no. By the way, I'd say the fiercest no I've had, in the last few years of approaching people is just no. It's not aggressive, because if you're not rude or in their face, then you'll just go, "No, I'm not interested." Which I think people just need to, we need to be encouraged to get over the fear. And actually, as you said, you've only had 2 people. I would say similar. I'm trying to think who has refused. Once you get into a conversation, they say you're not a weirdo. Who actually refuses? Very, very few. And then it's holy ground on the street or in the park or wherever it is. Look, we're coming vaguely into land. Right at the start, you talked about this heart condition, which is really shocking. But I can see and not in at all a glib way, but as you mentioned that your father died of it at age 48 and you've inherited it. Now, the gift that I guess that brings you is a sense of your mortality and the urgency of making your life count. Would that be right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, yes, it certainly does. And we've prayed many times in Jesus' name that the kind of the generational curse, if you like, of that is broken. And certainly for my boys, 2 sons, and it's interesting. We talk about generational blessing of evangelism and maybe even the law in our family. But it does. And I think. I've never struggled for life or urgency or passion. It's a real. My wife and I constantly talk. We feel we've got the real gift of contentedness, and the real gift of passion, and those I do feel that those are kind of gifts that God's given me. And I love someone told me a few years ago that enthusiasm means entheo comes God in you. And I love that idea, and so and you and I both enthusiasts in both senses of the word. But certainly I think the constant reminder that there is more to life than the few decades we get on planet Earth is certainly a motivator, and eternal destinies are at stake. So we keep going, and life in all its fullness here on Earth now is what we witness when people come to faith. Both that assurance of the future, but also God's presence in our life now. It's worth going for.
Yeah. Well, I will pray for you to be healed, but I would pray for everyone to have that sense of the imminence of their potential graduation to glory. Because, I mean, that, from me, a very different context. We're living in a war zone, expecting to die, each weekend going on the most dangerous road in the world. This is particularly in the early years. It just meant that you live like you believe it's true. You live with a sense of urgency. You want to keep short accounts. You want to offer and receive forgiveness. You want to have your house in order. You want to spend your money in a different way. And those are all the sorts of things that people listening right now, you need to engage with, and I'd wish a double dose of that reality.
Come on,
because then we are truly alive. And sadly, so many people's highest aspiration seems to be to arrive safely at death, and that is a really lame way to live. Anyway, I know I'm preaching to you as the converted there, but
come on.
Listen, mate. Anything you want to plug? Obviously, the Story Bearer. Tell us where we can get that.
So to find out more, you can go to storybearer.com. So that's a kind of website. There's loads of other videos and resources, and many people have seen some of the spoken words that I've done over the years. Kind of, you can find a collection of those there, and there's a blog around evangelism there, and you can buy the book there. But available wherever you get your books. Would love you to check that out if you're someone who really wants to think about how they share their faith with their friends and see steps forward there. Then that book's for you. And then in the future, my current area of passion and interest is around friendship. Again, because I just want people to come to faith, and the way most people come to faith is through friends. And yet we found in the last year that the biggest reason why Christians don't share their faith is a lack of meaningful relationship with people who aren't Christians. And so I'm really, I've been fascinated and captivated by digging into friendship. I think COVID has transformed the landscape of some of our relationships. I think it's the relationship we don't talk about enough. We talk about family and we talk about marriage loads, but Jesus wants us to be great friends. And I'll be really clear, we don't become friends with people to convert them, but yet that is God's chosen vehicle through which loads of people come to faith. So that's just, I guess, a plug for the future. If people are, if people want to look at friendship, there'll be another book coming out next year in 2023 around that. So would love you to check that out. And then finally, the young adult stuff. If you're part of a church where you think actually the church could do some help around reaching the missing generation, then please do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. We've been developing some resources, but we've got 3 years of research, conversations, intelligence around the conversations that we need to have to be more effective in this area. So you can find that again through, if you contact the Evangelical Alliance or through storybearer.com. There's details there as well. So yes, we'd love to chat to you.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Phil. It's been fantastic to talk to you. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Simon.
And everybody, I trust you've enjoyed it. I hope you're feeling inspired to take risks, to step out of your comfort zone, to share your faith, to live with a greater sense of urgency. Listen, if you've enjoyed it, I'd love you to give us a top quality review on iTunes or Spotify, and gossip it to a friend. And if you want to be in touch with me, simongilbo.com or any of the social media platforms. I want to thank Adam Thomas Steers for the editing, Mike Sandeman for the mixing, and next week I'll be back with another fantastic guest. In the meantime, have a great week. Toodaloo.